So today, we're going to be talking about some schema design patterns and really talking about leveraging existing REST APIs into your GraphQL layer and really how you can accelerate adoption in there. Just a little bit about myself. My name is Michael Watson. I'm head of DevRel at Apollo. I'm obsessed with GraphQL. My first kind of step into the GraphQL community was back in 2018, and I've been doing stuff with it ever since. More recently, if you want to connect with me or kind of get in the community, I've started up a lot of stuff in the MCP space, specifically around building MCP servers. So there's a Luma calendar there, MCP-server. I've been putting up events, and I really want to get more GraphQL into the MCP community space and more people talking about GraphQL and everything there. So we do accept talks. There's a lot of stuff inside of there. I'm going to be talking with Uri about getting a little bit closer to the community working group as well coming up. Very new. But let's talk about the agenda today. So really excited. I'm going to be going through a couple things. First, we're going to start with what I like to call the dream query. And then we're going to talk about REST with GraphQL and some stuff we've done at Apollo to make that a little bit easier. And then I'll show you some schema design tools and some patterns. So we'll actually get into some live coding stuff. But to start out, the dream query. So how many people have heard this concept of the dream query? No one. Perfect. I love it. I coined this term. This is mine. I did this. So really the idea behind the dream query is you're building your query what you need first. You're starting out with what are the client needs. So imagine like someone's coming to you and say, I have this UI that I need to build. OK, what's the UI? What structure of that query should we have that solves the need of what that UI is? Right? And this is actually how a lot of large enterprises from like a platform engineering effort. GraphQL got really big in platform engineering teams. How do we provide platform API that's flexible so we're not just building a lot of multiple custom bespoke endpoints? And a lot of people would have office hours. You come to office hours and we'll tell you how to get that data from the graph. And it usually started out with a blank piece of paper. And that paper would have maybe like a screenshot from Figma or an exported image of what the UI design is. And then they would just be handwriting the query, actually like talking back and forth with the team. So it's exactly what the client needs. And this is just a simple example. Maybe I have a little banner that's showing like top 3 products, right? Just the exact things that are needed for that one little component. And the reason GraphQL fits so nicely kind of in this platform engineering world is really how GraphQL fits with orchestration. When you have that one query, all those fields could be hooked up to different data sources. Doesn't all need to come from one data source. And I think that's one of the reasons why GraphQL got so big. We're going to be talking about some REST stuff today, but really it's data source agnostic when you're thinking about GraphQL. Some people do gRPC data sources. Some people do database data sources. Like, it's all fine. It's just GraphQL. So when you have this query, what does it actually look like? And so now I'm going to talk a little bit about like the Apollo side. We have what's called the Apollo router. A lot of the projects we work on kind of has a composite schemas, a federated GraphQL aspect. And when you have this world, you're going to have a graph router. I said the Apollo router in ours, but there's a lot of other graph routers out there. The Guild has one, a lot of open source options out there. But really, when that operation comes into your graph router, there's going to be an execution path, right? And we often call this the query planner from the Apollo side. So we create a query plan when that operation comes in, we execute it. So in our example, those first few fields are actually coming from our products service. The next price field is actually coming from a different service, but I need the product's ID to then send to that service. Right? So this is just the orchestration that naturally kind of fit with GraphQL and the composite schemas. And so that's a dream query. I made it up. This was the first time it's ever been talked about, dream query. And this isn't something that only works for like UI or anything like that. A lot of things are talking about agents. I just mentioned I'm kind of in the MCP community and everything right there. This dream query is the same exact thing for them. What is the context I want to give to that agent? We always talk about GraphQL as being ready for whatever vNext is, that next application. No, it's here. It's agents. And nothing's actually that different, right? Like the API access you want to give to the agent is really just a dream query. What is the right context you want to give to them? And that's also why I think it's such a great fit. So let's talk a little bit about REST and GraphQL. So what I have on the screen right here, this is actually a resolver. A couple years ago, I worked with a colleague, Gerald Miller, who built a Spotify clone. So we rebuilt the Spotify web app. We wrapped the Spotify's REST API with GraphQL, made this like slick little Apollo client demo. Really cool. But this is actually like some of the code for one of the resolvers that's in there. And what we actually found, especially in a lot of the GraphQL deployments in production, there was a lot of resolvers that were just thin wrappers over a GraphQL API, or over a REST API. And you can see, like, this is just get artist albums with just some arguments that are being provided to that. But there's a lot of code behind the scenes with all of that. And I think that's one of the things that we started to recognize a lot of, okay, there's these challenges. And one thing we started to hear from a lot of our customers is it was great getting the graph up, and then they hit this one point where everyone else in the company needs to start putting their stuff on the graph. And it usually started out with a REST group. And they would kind of be like, well, I don't want to write a resolver for the REST API that I already have like put together that has this slick template to auto-generate everything together. So how could I do this differently? And this is where we created Apollo connectors. And so Apollo connectors is a declarative way to express, the semantics of what your REST API stuff is inside of your GraphQL schema. One thing I really like about this is just the declarative nature in that. And we're actually going to go through and show a lot of the tooling and patterns of some examples with Apollo connectors. But the difference here is I'm not managing code anymore. Very specifically, if I think of that Spotify demo, 40 resolvers could have been deleted from the entire code base. Just the client helper class for get, post, patch, put, has 700 lines of code. Like it's just, do I want to maintain this as code, or do I want to maintain this as declarative schema? Because I already have that schema written, actually. It's just more of where do I want to write the little things of that REST transformation layer that's inside of there. And so I think this declarative approach is a really interesting approach, because one of the things I've always loved about GraphQL, I've done multiple talks over the years about schema design. I love being able to express the schema how I want to express it. I'm not a big fan of auto-generated schema stuff. I think there's a place for it, but I think at the top root query, you want to be able to handcraft what the experience is of getting into the graph and then triaging the data from there. And that's why I really like this approach with connectors. It allows me to kind of have the flexibility of, I want to define my schema this way based off that dream query, and then now I'm just going to connect those fields to the data sources that are in there. So this is where I'm going to stop the slides. Let's talk about some tools and actually building some of these things. Does this work now? OK, cool. I don't know if Caddyshack is a big thing out here. I'm a big golfer, so I thought this was a perfect moment for some Caddyshack. So there's, in the PDF I uploaded, there's some still shots of what I'm going to be showing. But one of the really cool tools we've been building and experimenting with is our connectors mapping playground. So you saw the selection set, kind of that little code snippet I showed on the screen, but how do you build that? And I think one of the really important parts of integrating REST into your scheme in this declarative way, it only works if you have the right tooling and developer experience around it. I need to be able to build these connectors, test them, and get through it. And that's really what this playground experience is trying to provide in its first step. So the connectors mapping playground has a couple different levels to it. And what we're going to do as an exercise is we're first going to look at the Stripe API. I just really like Stripe docs. I always kind of start out this place. But this is commonly where we come from a REST world. Maybe you have some Swagger UI, some OpenAPI definition, but you have something that's giving you some documentation around the arguments, the outputs, the things in the API. And so let's say these list all products. Maybe I want to start out of trying to expose like what those top products would be inside of there. I have a little curl command from here, from Stripe, and I have this JSON object response. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy the response as a first step. And then I'm going to go back into our connectors mapping playground, and I'm just going to paste it over here on the left side. This is our API response panel. So this is the JSON coming back from our API. And there's this little magic wand that I can just click, and it just auto-generates what the selection set is from that. And what's really nice about this is I can see what the projected results are in there. So really what I'm doing is I'm focusing on how am I transforming the data from my REST API to the shape of the GraphQL response I have. Right, so as I look at this, I might want to start changing things, right? Like the URL and object doesn't really make sense here. I don't want the object here either, and that doesn't make sense in GraphQL. And I can start changing some things, like I don't want it to be data, I want it to be products. So I can now start manipulating, shaping, changing what this is, right? This is a cursor-based pagination, I can see that right away. So maybe I want to have like a next field. And that's going to come from the data, where I'm going to take the last product, and I want the ID. Right? So now we can see there's that product ID in that next field right there. So I really have the flexibility to start changing, building, getting around in here. Now that selection mapping, there's like in our documentation, I should probably pull that up. In here, we have our connectors documentation. There's a lot of stuff available in the mapping language. We actually have a lot more on the preview build that's coming. Variables for like some simple math manipulation, things like that. If there's stuff that you can think of what you need, please throw them out there. One thing I will say about connectors is great for integrating REST APIs and everything, but one of the things I really love about connectors, especially in like a composite schema, a federated GraphQL world, you can mix and match all of these things. So when I was talking about deleting 40 resolvers from my previous example, that's not all the resolvers. It's just those were the simple resolvers that we're just calling directly to a REST API service, right? So you can mix and match these things together. Now, once I have this mapping, now I start thinking, OK, well, I want to build that connector and I want to test it. So I'm going to copy this mapping, and I'm going to switch over from basic mode to the connector mode. And it looks very similar, but you can kind of see some differences where now the connector is looking more like what I was showing earlier on the screen. So I'm just going to paste that selection set into here. I've already made the request to the team to automatically do that for me. I shouldn't have to copy and paste it, but today you do. And then we're going to want to do a couple things. So one, I'm going to want to change this URL. So if I go back to Stripe, I can see here's the URL right here. I'll paste that in. I also know I have a couple different things. I need to add some headers into there. So one, I need to add my authorization, bearer. I don't know if anyone uses stickies. I still use stickies. It's a great thing. And don't worry, I'm going to burn this API key right after this talk. So it's fine that it's on the screen. But what we've done is we've really just taken that selection set, we pasted that in, we changed our URL, we added that authorization header, and I have this example curl now. This is the new section that's kind of added in here. This is how I can start to like test that connector. Because it's really now just a curl command similar like what the documentation is. But it's exactly what's coming from what the connector would be executing. So I can copy this, open up the terminal, paste it. Cool, I'm getting products back from Stripe, right? So here's a bunch of those products. So I know my connector is starting to work, right? Now I can just start building this out. So this is going to be products. This is going to be returning a product connection, because we're going to create a little connection type for the pagination things in there. And then maybe I want to start adding in some arguments, right? So there's a bunch of things in here. One of them is like limiting. The default's 10. I don't have that many products in my staging thing, so we're going to make the limit 3. So we're going to add in some query parameters. Oh, we put a lot of extras in there. OK, and so the query parameters is just like the selection set. So I want to send like a limit, and I'm going to want to have that come from my args limit. And we'll just add in a limit as an integer, and we'll set it to 3 as a default. And then over here in our args, we can add limit, and I can add a random number or whatever. But the important thing is you notice that it starts changing what that curl command is. So now I can test this again, all right? I said 5. I should make this 1 just so it's easy to see in a terminal. So we come back, execute that. It's only returning 1 object. All right. We're really close here. Last step that I want to do is I just want to add that cursor. All right? And so I'm going to do the same thing. Cursor, cursor, great. Right? And now I'm going to add in a cursor argument, but I'm just going to make it undefined at first, right? Oops, or I think it's null. Yeah, null. Now I'll copy this, and I'll come back to my terminal and paste it. Oh, that's not the right thing that I copied. There we go. All right. Oh, and it says limit. My cursor. Okay, there we go. Cursor is in there now. All right. I was supposed to get to this uh-oh point for y'all. Uh-oh, we found an error, right? And this happens sometimes when you're developing things. And what I was talking about in kind of the tooling, right? I just called it cursor. It's not actually called cursor, unknown parameter. If I come back to my Stripe docs and look at this, it's called starting after. Simple, easy mistake. That stuff happens, right? So if I come back here and we change this, starting after, and we copied that. Starting after is empty, right? And that's because I didn't put a cursor in there. But if we went and took this product ID and dropped it in there, now we have our cursor starting after up here. Boom, there's the next product in there, right? So simple, we just build our first connector. And honestly, you kind of just go through those quick motions, and you can do that really with any REST API. Now, I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to go over to VS Code. And what we have on the screen, let me make sure this is large enough. What we have on the screen is we have a project that was just initialized with Rover in it. Rover is the CLI from Apollo that we use to create like a new project, to do stuff with inside of like Apollo's ecosystem. But really what it's done is just kind of created a project with some simple things. One, this is our configuration for our graph. So if we wanted to add in other GraphQL APIs or other things, this is where we could do that. And then we have a simple schema that's created for us. This is just all boilerplate that's added. But everything's configured for us inside of this. And what I'm going to do as a starting point is I'm just going to take this query, I'm going to delete it, and I'm just going to paste in the thing that we just created. All right, so I have everything that we just had just pasted, hard-coded inside of here. And I start getting red squiggles. One of the nice things is I have this project set up with the VS Code extension from Apollo, so I get all of these errors right here. And this is the part I want to show you that I think is really cool. Because we all talk about kind of like a vibe coding experience. I don't know, vibe coding's everywhere, I feel like. And I really hate most of the vibe coding things I've seen. But actually in GraphQL, it can get pretty good. So like I know that I need that product connection, and look, it's already just starting to do stuff. I just start tabbing this out. Type, yep, sure, all right, what's the next one? I already have my product as a type, because that's what this thing does. But I need to add more fields in here. Yeah, it's images. I'm just going to tab. We're just going to tab until it lets me stop. All right. And then there's a JSON scaler. Yeah, I got to add that. So some of these things return JSON. Cool. Like I just kind of like added all of those things inside of there. Now I'm getting a couple more red squiggles. Well, it knows that a product connection, right, what it just created down here, put all the page info in a page info object. That's not how we designed it. So we have a couple options of what we can do. I can just, copy this stuff over, paste it here, and delete the page info if I wanted. Save that. The red squiggles are gone. I could have changed it to where that page info object was there. It doesn't matter. The point more is you need to have this tooling to be able to be really effective in developing this stuff out. And that's one of the reasons we wrapped all this into our language server. That's what's powered in the connectors mapper, also what's powered here in VS Code and all the Apollo pieces of the puzzle. So that's it. We put that together. Now I do have over here a little configuration. I kind of already added this. I probably could have added it live since I copied and pasted the API key somewhere else already. But this is just so the Stripe API key is configured in here. And what that enables us to do is, things like this value I had right here, in like a production, I'd probably want to do like, config API key, something from those environment variables inside of that. So that's just how I could configure that. Now, we've built all of our connector and everything. And the second tool I want to show you is called Rover Dev. And this is really our hot reloading experience for starting up those connectors, starting up your graph, working with the Apollo router. Really all it's doing in the background, the Apollo router has a -- hot reload option where anytime its overall composed schema changes, it hot reloads. And so Rover Dev in the background, when I make a change to one of these files, it's just kind of making those updates to those files, so the router just uses this. The reason I'm saying this is you don't have to use Rover Dev. Like I do a lot of my deployment stuff in Docker and use a lot of Docker images. You can have a very similar type of workflow just using Docker if you don't want to use like another CLI. Now with that running, if we go to localhost 4000, this is Apollo Explorer. This is our little sandbox environment. You can point GraphQL at yours. You can do a lot of different things. But I have my pagination here. Oh, I'm getting an error. Okay, right. So this is the next tool I want to talk about, which is our connectors debugger. And so sometimes, when you're getting these errors, there's lots of different places in the stack where you could be getting this error, right? You saw kind of as we're building these connectors, testing them out. This is how you can actually look at the individual request and see, oh, look, there's no authorization token that was going through. I wonder why that was like happening. And that's where I can start coming back into the project. I think the big problem is I actually didn't save the file and I just saw composition successful. So if I now re-execute that, I still get the same error. That's probably something with that config. It's not gonna be a good live demo if something didn't break. So I will just go back to a hard-coded value and show that working, right? But you see how I can catch that, right? And now I can start looking at not only that, but the response. You can see like, what is that full response body that's coming in here, all just to see what is the data that was being returned. And what's cool about that, I really like this because what we can show, take note of the 3 putters on the screen. I do golf, so that's why it's putters. But let's take this value right here and put it in the cursor. Boom, different putters, right? We just did pagination on Stripe's like actual products. If you were doing checkout sessions, you need the line items, like all those things, all the same exact thing. And we did that in 5-10 minutes, right? And pretty slick. I think as far as the tooling and what you need to really start expanding this really starts to open the doors of what is possible and what more can we do. Now, I want to show just a couple patterns before my talk wraps up. The patterns I want to chat about, I have them also as slides in here. But one of the key things that I think is really important is identifying entities. So when you first start thinking about your REST APIs and how they come into GraphQL, taking connectors aside, you really should be thinking about what are your REST API endpoints that are really the entities that are going to make up like the core types inside of your graph. And one of the things I look for as a hint in this, when you look at the API of what it's being returned, I can quickly see that like there's a get for the products by ID. That's a hint right there of like, that's probably one of the entities I want to create. And the reason I want you to think in like the entities is when you start thinking about things like composite schemas, that's where we have the opportunity of extending those entities to other places and things, right? I'm showing some Stripe information on here with products, but most likely you don't have your product information in Stripe. You probably just have your pricing information in Stripe, and you probably have a product catalog in like a headless CMS or some other thing, a DynamoDB, I don't know, whatever it might be. But the point is you're going to need to mix and match those things together. So first you want to kind of find out what are those core entities. And like with this core entity, we want to add it as products. And if we came back into our schema, we actually could do that. One of the things you can do is you can actually add an @connect on the type itself. And that would be defining it as an entity. And what that's doing is that's giving the hint to the graph router that if there was some second, third, fourth, whatever step in the execution of that query plan that needed to get that information, I'm going to use this entry point to get that, right? So it's from Stripe. I have, I put everything in that one connector, but that's okay. So normally it'd be like products. And then you would have something like $this.id, right? Now, one of the other things that comes up, we're really identifying this product as an entity and putting some information there. But one of the common things that happens in this pattern, we all know about the n+1 issue, right? Data loader, how are we going to handle something like that? We do have batching support. So depending on what your REST API is, so if we went back to the products in here, when I look at the list all products, there's actually an array of IDs that can be put in here. And so there's a couple different things we can do. So I can come in here and say something like, I want the IDs to be a batch of the ID. And then there's a lot of things you can do. Like we can do not null. Oh, wait, it's, sorry, join not null and with a comma, right? Because the way Stripe requires the IDs to be sent is a comma separated string as that URL parameter. And now what we've essentially done is not only have we identified this entity as, or this type as an entity, but we've also identified a batching capability that's inside of there, right? So that will be used in any of the n+1 scenarios around this entity in that query plan execution. So I think it's really important to think about what are the entities in my graph and then how I'm going to expose those. Now, we covered kind of entities and the batching aspect of that, but the last thing I want to show you, which I think is really, really cool and powerful, is from another demo. Oh, and my zoom changed my scroll. Here we go. So this is basically a very similar schema design, but the way I've designed this instead is using AWS Lambda and DynamoDB. And what is really interesting is a lot of times you might have an individual object in your graph, and it's actually being sourced from multiple REST API endpoints or something like that. You can actually use multiple @connects, where each connect fulfills only a portion of the schema. So in our example here, if we're looking for a product by its ID, we're actually sourcing from DynamoDB. This is kind of the HTTP of how to do DynamoDB stuff with their REST API. Not pretty stuff, but that's DynamoDB's thing. And then here's the selection, right? So I'm sourcing the ID, the name, the description, the image from DynamoDB. But if someone wants the price field, then that's going to be sourced from that Lambda, right? They both have the same argument in this. Now, what's really powerful about that, I have everything running in the background so I can show you. Here's that query with that product ID, getting the information from those sources. Here's that query plan we were talking about earlier. It's the steps of what's being executed. Because those connects are at the same level of the field, we're actually able to send those requests in parallel, right? So this is where, as you start identifying inside of your schema, where you have an opportunity to reuse that same argument or that same field that might be sourcing information from two different API endpoints, this is a way you can do that that will now parallelize those requests, right? So now we can have a little more efficiency inside of our graph. All right, and now the last thing I'll say, because I already said MCP a couple times, but I gotta say it at least 5 more times before I leave. One thing I really like to point out about that dream query for a tool world for agents is how nicely a GraphQL operation fits in. And I think there's a lot of solutions out there right now in the MCP space of how is that representation of a tool, which kind of puts you into a world where you're no longer maintaining tools for your agents as code. You're really just getting to focus on building the agent, which I think is part of the magic of GraphQL and what I love in that space. So with that said, I just want to thank you all for coming to my talk. I'm going to stick around for questions. It looks like there's only 1 minute left, I see on the clock, but I'm going to be around. There's a panel on AI stuff coming up next that's got a lot of great speakers. And then we're also going to have a pop-up Amsterdam MCP event on Thursday. If anyone's around, feel free to come talk to me. It's on that Luma calendar. Would love to have you all there. Thank you so much.